Cheryl Millett here, and I want to come on specifically tonight, to actually speak about vitamin D. Now, in the past, there's been much research that's come out on vitamin D and the levels of vitamin D that you have and how that relates to the many conditions that are out there. And so, just to make sure we're on the go here, different things are cropping up. I want to talk about vitamin D3. So for me as a practitioner, it seems like sunshine when they talk about vitamin D3 being the sunshine vitamin, although it's a non-steroidal hormone at the end of the day, and it impacts much more in our body than just our bone density. And it comes from different sources, and I want to go through that a little bit as well. And I want to actually speak to some research that has come out during this event and has, as it relates to ICU and it relates to the immune system. So I want to read a few things. I'm actually going to put a couple of posts down below. I just thought it'd be a great idea to actually have certain sources for you to go and look up when you are ready. So let's start with what is vitamin D3 besides a non-steroidal hormone. And this is information that is typically given to practitioners, but hey, what is a practitioner? A practitioner is learning in a way with extreme focus, but I firmly believe that everybody can be their own practitioner to a certain degree for sure. If there's not enough distractions, people have done lots of deep dives and research. Putting it together in the bigger picture may take a little bit more effort and time, but at the end of the day, I think the simple things are the most effective things, and vitamin D is one of those simple things. So let's just say that vitamin D, if it is coming from the sun, has to go through some processes through the body. So let's first talk about, how you would get vitamin D into the body. And let's start off with a beautiful sunshine. Now the thing about sunshine is, well, it's got to reach the skin. If it is dark out, no sun, nighttime, or you even have dark skin, it takes that much more. And this would definitely affect those people who are living further closer to the Antarctica and or the Arctic Circle, whereas in the middle they would get the lovely sunshine. But again, we have night and day, and it would have to be day, and the sun would have to reach your skin. And just to, a key tip here to remember is that if you're slathering on oils and creams and things like that, especially most of them are synthetic molecules or artificial, and it's not the oils derived, coming through your system or coming out through your body and keeping it healthy that way, and in the skin naturally it's clogging the pores, it's hindering the process. So when you have that, and the other thing to be mindful of is how often you bathe and with what products you bathe. If you just lather up your body, and as we do with soap on our hands, be it our hands, our face, our arms, our legs, are most seen by the sun, then you are washing off those lovely oils. The cholesterol is needed to convert the vitamin D from the rays of the sun into vitamin D, which then has to go to the liver, because that's a key part. It's got to go. It's got to convert there. But to get it in through the skin, the sun, you have to consider those factors. So, yes, vitamin D is obtained from sun exposure. It's obtained by foods, and of course, as foods, we know that then you can extract it from there, and it can be supplements as well. So there's a couple of different conversions that have to happen to get it to what we would call the usable form by our body to support those key functions, whether it's supporting your bones in the ways it does, or it is affecting your immune system and actually working in managing inflammation. So as they say here, vitamin D has other roles in the body, including reduction of inflammation, as well as modulation of such processes of cell growth. So this is important here. Neuromuscular and immune function, and glucose metabolism. We know that those things are very important. Metabolism is very important. New cell regeneration is very important because we're one big cell regeneration machine, right? And when we don't get the support for our body, this is where aging comes in, right? So let's go in and actually talk about the, actually I'm going to skip over here. I just want to talk a little bit more about what increasing your vitamin D3, optimum levels of vitamin D3 is actually in your body. So here we go. Skin, eyes. So we've talked about nerves, your vascular system. So that means your heart, your respiratory system, and that of the immune system, and metabolism, which has to do with weight management. So people who are low in vitamin D, then weight can be that much more of a struggle as well. And sleep, that would be the next thing. What I want to bring in here too as well is that receptors, you may have heard this. So vitamin D has its receptors that it's fitting into are located in our brain, our spinal cord, and our central nervous system. And so every type of cell has receptors to respond to vitamin D. Vitamin D, or a non-steroidal hormone, is very valuable to our entire health at the end of the day. The research may just point out certain things, but let's get to a cellular function. And research indicates that it's the master key required to enter the central nervous system library that is in each of our cells, right? No, central nervous library, but it's the library that's in each of our cells, and it's activated by vitamin D. So this is how our cells determine the correct response or action when they encounter almost any stimulus. So vitamin D is truly essential, good for our health. It is. And this is an article that I wrote up, and I would definitely want it to kind of pull in, so like kind of the global, give you the feel for vitamin D. It's just beyond bones, and it's actually even beyond the immune system, which I'm going to go into this particular study here. So the effect of vitamin D. Now, I know it says calcifediol. That is the converted into the form. Let's just say vitamin D for simplicity here. Treatment and best available therapy versus best available therapy on intensive care unit admission and mortality among patients hospitalized for COVID-19. It's a pilot randomized clinical study. And the other details, and I'm going to put this link down below as well. So here's the highlights. I want to read them to you. Vitamin D endocrine system, right? So it's hormone system, have a variety of actions on cells and tissues, which is a group of cells involved in the COVID-19 progression. Now you have to understand, COVID-19, my understanding with my research is the symptoms, okay? The symptoms. SARS-2, that's the actual virus itself. So early vitamin D treatment to hospitalized COVID-19 patients significantly reduced intensive care unit admissions, and vitamin D seems to be able to reduce severity of COVID-19, the symptoms. And vitamin D seems to be able to reduce the severity of the disease. So now this is a recent, I'm just going to give you the date on here. This is a recent October 2020, and the Journal of Steroid Biochemistry and Molecular Biology. Again, I said vitamin D is actually a non-steroidal hormone, but we seem to, at the times of research study history and coming up with names and not really understanding things, certain things were definitely given vitamin, the name vitamin, and that just means it's something little. It's micronutrient versus macronutrient. Macronutrients being the proteins, the carbs, and the fats, and micro, small micro, is these vitamins and minerals and other such things. So the objective here from the highlights, which or most important, is the highlights of this clinical study. The objective of this research study was actually to see. I'm getting all kinds of calls from, how could I say it? All kinds of states and countries from around the world. So we have this objective here to see how the body will respond to, especially those that are hospitalized for these symptoms. And it was double masked, which is very good. It's randomized. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to identify some of these, so I'm not going to go too much into it. But it was 76 consecutive patients hospitalized. Consecutive is one after the other, with the symptoms of COVID-19 infection and clinical picture of the acute respiratory infection. So confirmed by a radiographic pattern of viral pneumonia. So see the connection, pneumonia. So these patients may or may not have tested positive, but the idea was they were actually confirmed with a radiographic to see that they had a viral pneumonia. And then by a positive SARS-CoV-2 PCR test with a severity scale recommending hospital admission in case of total score greater than 1. Anyway, you'll be able to see it. So here we go. We've got 76 people that confirm that they have this pneumonia. They have these symptoms. Now, I'm not going to go through all the details. They actually go through here what, as they need to, what they were taking and what they did. But of the 50 patients treated with vitamin D, 1 required admission to ICU, right? It's 2%. While 26 untreated patients, 13 required, that's up to 50% of those, required admission into ICU. And I'm just kind of trying to get through the jargon here for you. So at the end of the day, of the patients treated with vitamin D, none died, and all were discharged without complications. The 13 patients not treated with vitamin D, who were not admitted to ICU, were discharged. And then of the 13 patients admitted to ICU, 2 died, and the remaining 11 were discharged. Okay, so conclusion. This pilot study demonstrated that the administration of a high dose of vitamin D, or 25-hydroxyvitamin D, a main metabolite of vitamin D endocrine system, significantly reduced the need for ICU treatment of patients requiring hospitalization due to proven COVID-19. And colcifediol seems to be able to reduce the severity of the disease, which I think is very important. But larger trials with groups properly matched will be required to show a definitive answer. Of course, of course. But the idea, and I'm going to post this down below, the idea is there's much research, a lot of research on vitamin D, where you can imagine people who have a certain particular condition, let's say, could be heart health, could be cancer, yes. Many different conditions have been researched to determine what their level of vitamin D is and be shown to be significantly deficient. So you can go do your research on that. So just go vitamin D deficiency and then whatever disease or whatever condition. And you'll see that there's actually a lot of them that show deficient. This is similar to omegas, wherever research has looked at omegas, and they have shown that people who have cancer have a very low omega-3, and very, very low. So you can do that. So when it comes to understanding vitamin D, the main thing is it's an absolute requirement by our body on many fronts that I've mentioned. Number 2, is important not to know your levels. Yes, that's very helpful, but to be sure that you're converting and getting the proper level of vitamin D. Call it therapeutic. Sun, wow, if you're out in the sun, you can get a whole host of vitamin D way beyond the recommended daily allowance. Now, the interesting thing about some of the the various research is how much, right? How much? And here in Canada, the recommended daily allowance, the RDA, is actually at 1,000. So if you have any products, if you're putting supplements out there and you're taking the recommended daily dose, you're only going to get 1,000. That's according to Health Canada's rules and regulations. And to get the NP number, the natural product number, for any supplement or nutraceutical that's out there. If you look up some of the research, let's just see if it's in here, I'm going to remember it anyway, they will tell you that in order to get your D levels up, let's say you're deficient, you could take upwards to 4,000. The doctors are recommending. In fact, they have a medicine, or let's say by prescription for vitamin D, at 10,000. You may ask yourself the question, is that too much? Now, let's go into the sources, because I think that's extremely important. If you can get it from the sun and consider those 2 tips that I gave you, that is going to be very important. Now, you can always get a vitamin D test, inquire about that, and get it tested. So let's go to food sources. I'm just going to go top of the head here because there's different, here's a little bit here. So when it comes to vitamin D, there's not just vitamin D. There's vitamin D1, there's vitamin D2, there's vitamin D3, and who knows if there's 4, 5, and 6. But the idea is vitamin D3 is the active one. Whereas if you're going to be taking mushrooms, and some mushrooms have been treated with UV light, usually they're in the dark, well, to increase their vitamin D, it's D2. So it needs to be converted to D3 in order to have the functions that we're talking about, or the complete impacts. And your liver, I mean, depending on if you cleanse or detox or support liver function, that's also important. So you can see, when we open the window up to how are you converting at the end of the day. If you're on cholesterol medications, you may be hindering the sun rays with the cholesterol in your lovely skin that's nice and clear and able to reach, the UV rays are able to reach there, then you may be hindering the process of the conversion from sun if you are very low levels of cholesterol, and the medications can do that as well. So cholesterol has huge benefits in our body, but not to go there. Vitamin D. So vitamin D, quite often we're thinking about vitamin D, and it says in the flesh of the fatty fish. It's in the fat, let's just say, underneath the skin of the fish. So when you get fish, now they have to be cold water fish, right? So if they are from the south, then not the same. They don't really need, now if they're deep down, that's a different story, but they got to be cold water fish. So here, salmon seems to be a common one, but again, they have salmon that's farm salmon, which would be different than wild salmon. There's trout, there's tuna, mackerel, those kind of things. And what we're very familiar with is the liver. So the livers of fish have been with vitamin D as well as vitamin A naturally, because guess what? It's doing the conversion, so it's bound to have vitamin D in the liver, right? And that's why they call them, fatty livers, and sometimes it's a progression, but they are already rich in fats to begin with. They're rich. And the vitamin D itself has to be taken in an oil. It's a fat-soluble nutrient or vitamin. In this case, I'll say nutrient. It has to be followed. It's just like vitamin A. To find them in oils is much better. So fish liver oils have been something that's been promoted for a very, very long time. And I always joke because the people in the Caribbean have been taking cod liver oil, and meanwhile they're in the beautiful sunshine. They really don't need it for the vitamin D. But they were taking it anyway. Something that came from London, came from UK, and so there you have it. But what happened with the fish liver oils is at a point in time when food processing exists, and what they did in here in America is they would refine the oil. So they'd heat the oil, but they'd bleach and deodorize it as well. So process the oil would destroy would destroy the vitamin D and vitamin A, and then they would add it in artificially. So they've been caught on that several years ago, and the idea is to have, cold water fish, wild and raw. That would be the ideal, which is why I understand this from the Auum, the raw seal oil, why I understand so much about that, and come from food processing for 20 years. So in the case, and it's a good point here in this practitioner's info here, the animal's diet will affect the vitamin D that's in the tissues, the liver tissues. But other things like beef liver, cheese, egg yolks have small amounts of vitamin D, but small amounts in totality, if we're having whole foods, has other things in there as well, and delicious fats. So mushrooms on the market, yes, vitamin D too, so we have to understand the differences. And then I want to bring up the fact of eggs here, back to eggs. The chickens typically would actually be consuming, they'd be outside in their natural environment, and they'd be omnivores, they wouldn't be eating grains. So two things come to mind. One, if they're not outside, where's the light coming? Where's the sunshine coming in for the chicken? So where you get your eggs from. On the omega side of it, if they're just given grains and they're not eating the insects, if you remember the old cartoons, be dating yourself like me, you'll see that you can recall the hen having a fight over a worm, trying to get a worm out of the hole. And we know other birds do the same thing. They'll eat worms. So that diet will have an impact even on when we think of sources of beef liver, cheese, egg yolks, on how their fats and their fat-soluble nutrients are based on their diet. So a very good important part that this government website speaks to. Doesn't go into as much detail as what I'm giving you, but there is that. So at the end of the day here, when we're thinking about foods, there is going to be probably trace amounts of solvents in a variety of foods, as they say here, chicken and turkey, and you may get traces in other things, but ideally have to understand that, and I'll give an example back to the fish. So if you're going to get vitamin D from the fish, the fat of the fish, you need to consume the fatty jelly-like substance that's between the skin and the protein of the fish, and not to be burnt or highly oxidized or fried in a way that you're going to destroy the vitamin D that's in there. Now, most of the omegas or fat-soluble nutrients, when we talk about as fat, vitamin D in the fat, is actually going to be in the head of the fish, the brain, similar to us. Right? So a lot of the omegas, a lot of the fats, our brain is mostly fat, besides water, and that is important to remember, that part of the fish. So when they're taking fish oils, they are taking all the leftovers from the fishing industry and they are blending it all up, refining it, or other words, molecular distilled, purified. They'll use all these fancy words for the processing of the oil, which is not ideal, thinking that omega-3 is very, very susceptible to heat. And vitamin D as well, right? Minerals are a different story. Minerals are hard. Minerals are, they just pass around in our planet, get picked up by the soil, and come in and do what they need to do. Be it there's organic and inorganic minerals, but they don't get affected by heat as much as vitamins do. So let's just see what they have here. But as I went through the list, how much should you have? So you're going to see on here, it says one cod liver oil, 1 tablespoon, and how much is in it, but how much is it usable? Because if it's oxidized, because they've determined when they did studies of certain supplementation, after the fact it's been in the bottle, 50% of it's oxidized, which just adds an extra stress on the body. And that's not what we want. So they're going through values in here. When you read the chart, you have to take into account how, what kind of form it is, the vitamin D as well, and what how, the growing, everything that has to do with this to be quality, and then the refining process. So it doesn't even matter if, and there was a good example that a biochemist would do, and he says, okay, let's think of functional. You're going to see a chair, right? A chair is functional. 4 legs, a back, a seat, whatever it is. It's functional as a chair. You take that chair and you put that in a blender and you blend it all up. And you take that out and you put that, pile it on the floor, let's say. And is that functional as a chair anymore? No, it's not. See, it's been put into a blender, it's been processed, and is no longer the whole nutrient anymore. It might be in pieces. And the tests are interesting. I'm not going to go into the some of what they do with how they measure, vitamin D and things like that. Might not be what you think it is, and they have to use charts and colors and stuff like that. So this is it's a good website, and again, it's primarily for practitioners. So there's a lot of information here. There may be information here not quite, don't quite understand, and when they call things out in amounts and that kind of thing. So, and there's a bit of studies and things like that. But vitamin D deficiencies they do exist, and they exist across the planet. The more and more people spend inside and eating processed foods, because you can just imagine that processed foods would take a stress on our body, wouldn't give us the nutrients we need as well, and we may need more in order to support our immune system when we're not out and about moving around in eating a good diet. So when we think here, vitamin D deficiency, people can develop vitamin D deficiency when usual intakes are lower over time than recommended levels. Well, let's call it your recommended levels. And that's exposure to sunlight, where exposure to sunlight is limited. So I'm thinking about people inside and children inside. When the kidneys cannot convert into adaptive form, when the liver cannot convert as well, do its piece. Absorption of vitamin D from the digestive tract is inadequate. That's another thing to think about. The one reason why Auum becomes in itself a valuable source of vitamin D is it's actually vitamin D in a raw oil that's held under the tongue, so things can be absorbed sublingually, because your salivary glands has a specialized glands that exist within the salivary glands called sublingual glands. So sublingual, under the tongue. Medicines, there's certain medicine, heart medicine, that you take, you put it under your tongue, and it will absolutely absorb there. So the idea is the digestive tract is dysfunctioning a lot, and I wish it weren't that way, but when we think of digestive disorders, and how the digestive system is affected in many ways by processed foods, by antibiotics, and by stress as well, that could hinder the process of the food intakes that you have. So with the skin, it'd be your bathing, your care, your personal care routine, the cholesterol medications, and on the side with foods, it would be depending on how your digestive system is functioning, and within the digestive system, you have your liver. So diets low in vitamin D are more common in people who have milk allergy. Now that may be one source as well, milk, or lactose intolerance, and those who consume a vegan diet or an ovo-vegetarian diet. Now in the case of vitamin D in milk is usually fortified with vitamin D. Okay, so fortified by vitamin D. Which vitamin D is that? Is that vitamin D2? Is it the highly processed vitamin D? Because there's different process. If you think of supplementation, a lot of the vitamin D comes from sheep's wool, lanolin, the oil on the sheep's wool, and it's a kind of like a reverse process, but there's different processes. What I heard through Weston A. Price and speaking to one of the chapter presidents a number of years ago, there's a couple of processes for it, and one will make it more vitamin D2, be cheaper, and the other one will give you a much higher level of vitamin D3, which is what we do want. So in children, vitamin D deficiency is manifested as rickets, a disease characterized by failure of bone tissue to become properly mineralized, resulting in soft bones and skeletal deformities. Not something we want. So in addition to bone deformities and pain, severe rickets can cause failure to thrive, developmental delay, hypocalcemic seizures, tetanic spasms, cardiomyopathy, that's to do with the heart, and dental abnormalities, right? So it's to do with the teeth there. So a prolonged exclusive breastfeeding without vitamin D, that is one thing for if you are planning to get pregnant. Ideally, to take the vitamin D ahead of time would be to prepare to plan if you know you're going to get pregnant. If you are pregnant, and it's like, oops, surprise, good surprise, then we would want to make sure that vitamin D supplementation is good. That way, they often give them to infants too. But again, to get it in oil and have it sublingual would mean just to put an eyedropper, a milliliter, half of milliliter into a child, and then it just kind of sits in the mouth. Like breast milk actually absorbs sublingually as well. And rickets are most common in breastfed black infants and children. Well, with the darker skin, that is not uncommon. And when of skin color, I mean, it's a wonderful world where we kind of move around and we're all getting along. And then yet less sunshine, less light. So it's been shown to, with people coming from Africa, of various different colors, degrees of colors in the skin, darkening of the skin, where even autism is an issue in the firstborns here. So we have to think of vitamin D for everyone, and maybe more so for some people than other. But there is a buildup that requires your vitamin D, and as anything, it happens over time too. But rickets is so severe, and there's the other things that show us that we don't have levels of vitamin D, and this is where I think it's important to get the test as well. So as it says, the fortification of milk, a good source of calcium. I drink raw milk. When you have pasteurized, homogenized milk, it's a bit different. But needless to say, these grains that are being fortified, the breads being fortified, are not the ideal sources. So, and bones, good developing bones is very important. Activity and physical activity will definitely help with bones as well, and muscles and stuff like that. So they go through here, you're going to see it where they talk about who are more susceptible. And again, many factors come into play. How many sources, or the variety of sources that you have, vitamin D that you're exposed to, and how the quality of them are, and how your body is actually able to process them. This is going to be very, very so important. So it's, I'm going to put this down, again, I'm going to put this up, but the recommended daily doses of vitamin D, again, in Canada is only 1,000, where in the States, I'm understanding that the doctors will say 4,000, they'll say 4,000. So you have to understand enough about supplementation. Again, it should be an oil. For vitamin D, supplementation has been found to be in an emulsion, been flavored in a little white tablet. This is highly, highly processed vitamin D. You may not be getting your vitamin D like you think you are. You might be wasting your money. So here I just wanted to put conclusions about vitamin D and the certain conditions, one being cancer here. Laboratory and animal studies suggest that vitamin D might inhibit carcinogenesis and slow tumor progression. And that's a very important piece here. The idea is that even omegas in themselves, a certain research, it's not published yet, but I was privy to getting some information, which is when people go through cancer, it's poison. The chemo treatment is poison, and they usually have nerve damage, and neuropathy is what they call it. So chemo treatment induced peripheral neuropathy. And this can be another benefit for having vitamin D in an oil matrix in the case of raw seal oil. and having the best. So they did use our oil in the study. Again, they're continuing to do research on it. They first did field study and stuff like that. That I can't send you the final research anyway, but very big improvements in there, because 100% of the time, people that go through cancer treatment, and treatment being a poison, there is 100% of the time nerve damage. So if you want to avoid that, then it's important to get a well-rounded oil, a raw oil with vitamin D, minimally vitamin D. Vitamin A has its benefits as well, but what was used in the research was the raw seal oil with the vitamin D. And whereas in neuropathy, to do with diabetic neuropathy, just to mention it quickly, in the study here in Toronto, all they did is use straight up seal oil, raw seal oil, not the one that they sell, because they did create their own product, but that's not raw. The one they did use is the Auum. And so it's good for you to know these kind of things, because it's the subtle difference when people go to fish, or they even go to krill, and then they come to mammalian, they notice the difference. And even when they go back and forth, they go and try another, maybe a good wild whatever fish, they don't get the same results. I was just speaking to somebody today about that. They get their supplements from a certain particular person, and for 1 year she tried their particular omega and did not get the same results. That's not the first one. So let's just talk about, there's the studies here, some other things that vitamin D higher levels are very important for, and then we'll kind of wrap up here, so I'll give you enough time to digest this for sure. Breast cancer, some observational studies support an association with vitamin D deficiency and breast cancer. And we know where breast cancer is in the scope of how much and what it all involves that way. So my suggestion to women would be definitely some therapeutic doses of vitamin D3. But if I have to see the bigger picture, there's much to say about cancer in itself. In my book, The 7 Stages of Diseases, absolutely would tell you some of the root causes. So when we think of vitamin D and omegas, this is to help you support the immune function, but ideally you get the bigger picture. Colorectal cancer, not fun either. So again, there's been research here to show that levels have been less, and when levels are brought up, there's a lower risk of getting colorectal cancer, lung cancer, pancreatic cancer, prostate cancer. So you can see cancer. So conclusions about vitamin D and cancer due to so in some respects it's unable to assess the balance of benefits and harms of supplemental vitamin D to prevent cancer. Now, some of the things that I want to say about is, I don't know what sources of vitamin D they used in some of these studies. It would be very good to know. Cardiovascular disease, vitamin D intake, depression. Also, because vitamin D is involved in many of the brain processes I mentioned before, and there's vitamin D receptors are present on neurons and the areas of the brain. So they also have been, I've seen this before in research, have indicated that there is inflammation in the brain where there's depression. And I want to say that when we think of inflammation, inflammation is just a symptom, right? Just a symptom. Doesn't get to the root cause. Toxicity is one of the root causes. How our body is able to detoxify better is more of the question as well. So this is why higher therapeutic doses, or making sure we have optimum levels of key nutrients, will support our body to function optimally. But again, to take it in the bigger picture, we have to consider the whole body, and including the mind and thoughts. Just with that, multiple sclerosis, so MS, when we're thinking about low levels of vitamin D, type 2 diabetes. This is when I talked about metabolism, the vitamin D role in glucose metabolism, and weight loss, which, you know, a lot of people are thinking about weight. They do. I mean, psychologically, weight is one of those things that has a play. It has a, you know, on the mind itself, on thinking, how we feel about ourselves, all of that. But ideally, and we make vitamin D as part of that regimen to support the body to have good metabolism and then balance weight, as I will say it. So we don't want to have excessive vitamin D, but the body is very smart, and if done naturally, the body will absolutely be know more how to deal with it if we're dealing with natural levels. But experts do not believe that excessive sun exposure results in vitamin D toxicity. That would be some common sense besides the studies here, but that also the when we're thinking about the synthetic vitamin D that you're taking supplementation, I see that as the absolute hindrance of too much exposure to that. But you can get that in other supplements as well. So when we think of interactions with medications, vitamin D supplements, to round this off, may interact with several types of medication. Here are a few examples. So weight loss drug, together with a reduced fat, can reduce the absorption of vitamin D. So you'd have to take more vitamin D in that case. Statins, in here, statin medications reduce cholesterol synthesis. And we know that vitamin D, if you're trying to get vitamin D from the sun, then you need to have the cholesterol. So it says here, because an endogenous vitamin D from outside is derived from cholesterol, statins may also reduce vitamin D synthesis. In addition, high intakes of vitamin D, especially from supplements, may reduce the potency of Lipitor. And this is tricky because then you're now going, I just want to move to synthetic molecules, can't take anything natural, my health, and be it vitamin D has a huge play across the board, right? From nerves to immune system and to bone health and so forth, right? Metabolism. And then the other one is steroids. So the idea is when you read all of this, it has to be flipped around a couple of times. You know, it's got to be seen multidimensional, and it's going to be important. So there's a lot of, you know, the references are here. It's quite a lot of information, but I wanted to come on board and talk about it from the research or from the studies and things like that. So there you go. Vitamin D in a big mouthful is what today was, or what this video is about. Again, it's only trying to simplify it, at the same time giving you enough information to better understand this thing we call vitamin D, or the sunshine vitamin, aka a non-steroidal hormone, which has much impacts on our body. If you measure it, then that is very helpful. If you look at your diet and see what you're doing and your activity and sun exposure and how you feel, and if you have been susceptible to cancer, have cancer, had cancer, then it's worth talking more about it and learning more about it. So I'm Cheryl Millett. I am a holistic nutritionist and a practitioner iridologist, and I work in the metaphysics as well, so understanding the well-roundedness. But I have specialized in the Auum omegas with a vitamin D, with vitamin A, and some without, some with, so it depends on which product, for over 12 years now, and that has led me to deep dive in understanding fats and the health benefits for our body, the absorption, the quality, but that comes also from my food processing background, but I could understand it, and how we feel, how we're just feeling, and those symptoms are definitely giving us signs. So there you go. I want you to take care. If you need to contact me, then the best way to do that is just go on my website at cherylmillett.com, CherylMillett.com, and you'll also see under the omegas some talk about vitamin D. You'll see there's an article in there as well, and any other research and certain there. And then down below, I'll put in a few links, so you'll have them directly down below, and then I'll post this on a few other places as well. So take care, and best of health, and we'll maybe hear from you. Bye for now.